We have a reading today. It's a poem called The Guest House. It's by Rumi. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door, laughing, and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. When I was a kid, I gave my intuition a megaphone. I paid attention to my feelings, and I honored them. While other kids I knew had FOMO, fear of missing out, not me. My mother describes that we could have a house full of guests involved in all kinds of lively activity. And at some point early in the evening, paying attention to my tired body, I would announce to the group that I was going to bed. And then I did, and I felt perfectly content with that decision to opt out. Apparently, I did this regularly. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed play. When I was 10 years old, my siblings and I had an epic pillow fight. We gathered every pillow from every bed, sofa, and chair in the house. We piled them high in the living room, and we went at it. And when my dad discovered the ruckus and saw how we repurposed the furniture, he firmly instructed us to take those pillows back where they came from, immediately. But somewhere in my body, I knew I wasn't finished playing. So without hesitation, I took one large pillow under each arm, and I headed out the front door of the house. I could see my dad's irritation and confusion. And when he asked where I was going, with my best joyful smirk, I said, "You told us to take the pillows back where they came from. We're going to the store." Following my lead, the other kids took 2 pillows each and joined me as we marched down the street in a pillow parade. Perhaps it was sassy and misguided, and we all got in big trouble. But my inner voice had me secretly celebrating. I felt creative and witty and a little proud. It felt good to honor my feelings. As I get older, I've found that it's gotten much trickier to do this. Have you ever noticed the way young children walk around with a natural connection to their feelings? It's almost like they ooze feelings sometimes. They're deeply in touch with what they like and what they don't, and what they want and what they don't, and they express it all unapologetically. Maybe through a tantrum or incessant requests for a preferred activity, or with contagious smiles and chin-to-the-sky, wide-armed twirls, indicating unbridled joy over pretty ordinary things, like soap bubbles or piles of leaves big enough to plunge into on the front lawn. Kids are even expressive in their shyness, clinging with a desperate grip to a caregiver's clothing, or hiding behind a parent's leg, peeking out with half their head. And when it comes to love, kids engage wholeheartedly. They give hugs with a running start. They have a tireless readiness to cuddle, like puppies. And sometimes, to flaunt their profound sense of whimsy, they might wear a princess dress or a cape or some other Halloween-type accessory on a random Monday in March, just because the Spirit moved them. Kids honor their feelings. Sometimes it seems like they know something we don't, something the rest of us have forgotten. They inspire me because feelings are really important. And when we dismiss them, we lose something. I've heard feelings described as a compass that guides us in navigating the world. But I've also noticed that honoring feelings is not a thing our culture values so much, especially in adult life. Growing up, we learn when and where and how much it's okay to express our feelings. And we learn to defer, at least in part, to voices outside of ourselves for these rules. Often, as we enter young adulthood and beyond, instead of being guided by our feelings, social norms become our compass. And some of that learning is necessary and healthy. It would be pretty inconvenient if all of us had meltdowns every time something didn't go our way. When we had a bad hair day, or we had to stand in a long line, or when our plans have to change at the last minute. So we practice regulating our feelings and keeping many of our impulses to ourselves. And it's pretty easy for most of us to become really good at this because the human brain is wired for connection. And self-inhibition helps us get along with each other so we can work and play and relate in relative harmony, which is great. It ensures we're not making the people around us too uncomfortable. And in general, people are uncomfortable with feelings, especially big or unpleasant ones. And this makes sense to me. From the time we enter school, we learn not to show too much excitement or curiosity or ask too many questions, especially at the wrong time. If we express sensitivity, we might be called a crybaby. If we express anger, we're labeled aggressive. And we get the message that all of this is problematic. I spent 20 years as a school counselor, and during that time, it struck me as interesting that many teachers would refer students to me simply for naming a feeling or mentioning an unpleasant situation that we expect to be connected to one or more difficult feelings. A bad day, an argument with a friend, not making the team, being left out, the death of a pet or a loved one. Students were sometimes confused about why they ended up in my office. In trying to connect with another human by sharing something about their lives, the message they received was big feelings don't belong here. Over there, that's where big feelings go, behind closed doors with a stranger. Like there's something necessarily concerning or even shameful about having feelings and letting other people know. For me, this sets up a strange double standard. When students share about most subjects, they don't automatically get invited to take those shares elsewhere. When they talk about the weather, we generally don't suggest that they continue the conversation with a science teacher or a meteorologist. We accept most topics of conversation as opportunities to connect with each other. But rarely does our learning in school pertain to our inner worlds. It seems like almost all modern education is about outward subjects. Most people haven't learned or practiced how to be with feelings, how to honor them, and how to listen deeply and respond compassionately, either to our own feelings or those of others. I have a school counselor colleague who won't go to pep rallies because she's moved to tears by the collective joy and excitement. And I think her joy is beautiful. But in those moments, she's embarrassed that she can't summon the composure of a stereotypical British person. And the truth is that crying in the corner of the gym becomes a distraction. It's really unbelievable how freaked out people get when we cry at the wrong time. And it's almost always the wrong time. Unless someone died, and then crying becomes an obligation. There are a lot of rules. Our culture has a very narrow definition of appropriate times for big feelings. So we learn how to make other people comfortable, but there's a cost to dismissing our feelings. Feelings originate in our bodies, and I recently heard the body referred to as a house. All parts of ourselves live there. And in the living room, there's this child who's playing and creative and excited and loving, and sometimes stubborn or hurting and in pain, and wants attention, all the aspects of living. And sometimes we start feeling overwhelmed and stressed by this child's demands, which we might feel powerless to meet. So we leave the living room regularly and we go upstairs and get on our phone, on our computer, trying to figure things out or to work or to learn or plan. But the appeals from the living room get louder. Maybe there's crying or yelling or banging on the walls, but it's no problem. We just put in our AirPods or our other headphones and we go about our business. When I was 13, my mother remarried. We had one conversation in which she invited me to share my feelings about this new union. I was not in favor. I voted no. But as it turned out, like most things in life, it was not a vote, at least not a real one. It was also clear to me that this was the only acceptable opportunity for me to share my feelings on this topic. And when I gave them, my mom issued a rebuttal. And in my mom's defense, I knew she loved me, and she wanted me to feel okay about the thing that was happening. But the way she went about it was to try to talk me out of my feelings. We try to talk people out of their unpleasant feelings all the time. I'm not proud to say I notice myself doing it every now and then. We say well-meaning things like, "Aren't you being a little dramatic? Look on the bright side. Things could be worse. It'll all work out in the end. Just stay positive. Cheer up." I got the message loud and clear that having and expressing big unpleasant feelings was wrong and selfish. I was supposed to talk myself out of my own feelings so I wouldn't put other people in an awkward position. So as a young adult, I left that child with all her big feelings in my body's living room, and I went upstairs to get on with my life. I got really good at drowning out the yelling and screaming and banging in that metaphorical living room. I began practicing the arts of avoidance and distraction, which are great tools when used in moderation. I put my time and energy into other things. I did well in school. I took on leadership roles in a youth group. I tried cheerleading, mostly because of peer pressure, but I don't regret it. I wrote poems for my school's literary magazine. My efforts at avoidance and distraction, although by some measure successful, became exhausting. Still, the consistent message I received was that expressing my unpleasant feelings in a direct way was problematic and selfish, and I didn't want to be those things. So I continued my work as a feeling scientist, experimenting with habits that have been difficult to unlearn, numbing or self-medicating with food or other substances, engaging in obsessive-compulsive behaviors that kept my focus on controlling my outer world so I wouldn't have to think about my inner one, internalizing my feelings, which ultimately led to some undesirable physical and mental health symptoms, including thoughts of suicide. My favorite experiment, though, was with passive aggression. I faithfully practiced sarcasm, the silent treatment, eye rolling, door slamming, And one day I found myself in a particularly heated argument with my stepfather. I forget now what it was even about. He and I disagreeing was kind of a common occurrence. But he had been at the kitchen sink washing dishes while we argued, and in his anger, he stormed out of the house, leaving the kitchen faucet running. I reflexively moved to turn it off, but then I thought to myself, screw him, and I left the water running, ultimately flooding the kitchen, damaging the floor. When we don't return to that child in our living room regularly and attend to our uncomfortable feelings, they find their own path to expression. And often the impact isn't one we're proud of. That kid will find ways to interrupt or sabotage all that good work we do upstairs. I didn't enter that interaction intending to hurt anyone or to damage property, but all behavior has an impact. It's also important to note that I wasn't experiencing much ease or playfulness or joy or excitement or curiosity at that time in my life. Because that stuff was left in the living room too. Something I've learned over time, but didn't quite grasp back then, is that our feelings are a package deal. When we disconnect the thinking body from the feeling body, attempting to lock away the feelings we don't want, we lock away the ones we do want. This is one of those immutable laws of the universe, like the space-time continuum. And when I came to understand this one single thing, which I'm not really sure we can learn in any other way than through our own experience, I dug that megaphone out of a pile of long-neglected things and gave it back to my feelings. I stopped asking myself whether each feeling was one I wanted to have, whether it was convenient or acceptable for me or other people. I simply started to pay attention, to listen, to myself. And instead of being a gatekeeper and barricading my inner child in the living room, I began stepping fully inside regularly. There's a Canadian author and meditation teacher named Jeff Warren, whose sense of humor and lightheartedness really resonate with me. One of the guided meditations he offers is called Welcome to the Party. It's a suggestion to greet all of our feelings mindfully, without taking ourselves too seriously. So whatever's going on with that child in my living room, I experiment with bringing this attitude of openness to it. Curiosity and joy, welcome to the party. Worry, restlessness, anxiety, loneliness, welcome to the party. Happiness, grief, silliness, jealousy, creativity, fear, hurt, welcome to the party. It's all worth honoring and celebrating. Mill Creek is a community that invites us to awaken to love. And I don't think we can do that without also awakening to everything else. This message is not a how-to. I'm not suggesting that anyone meditate, unless you want to, in which case I wholeheartedly endorse it. I firmly believe that we each have our own path and our own answers. Though we rarely travel that path or discover those answers alone, I certainly haven't. And by the way, that's a really big frustration of mine. I identify as a pretty strong introvert, and I often prefer to do things alone. If I could awaken to love exclusively at home alone, I would do that. Alas, as you use, we recognize that we are, in fact, part of an interdependent web of existence, whether we like it or not, and when we like it and when we don't. And within this congregation, we believe in the power of spiritual community. And within that, we practice opening ourselves to all of life, not just the fun stuff, with wonder, awe, and imagination. And in that spirit, I invite you to consider what honoring feelings looks like in your own life, both alone and in community. How often do you hang out with your own inner child in that living room? How comfortable are you spending time there? Who do you invite in, if anyone? And what does that look and feel like? What practices in your life support honoring feelings, your own and those of others? And what's the impact on your broader life and the lives of those you touch? Thank you, and be well.